Good afternoon, Pune. So we will be talking, the topic is love, lust and longing, the very elements of human form and every other form on this planet. Both men and women in ancient culture were never associated with just temptation, but with abundance, fertility and prosperity. The sensuous and the sacred were not opposed in Oriental art. Love, lust, and longing were openly embraced as the route to divinity, too. Love is central of our sense of being, isn't it? Intimacy is redefined in today's times. The boundaries between love, lust, and longing are divided, and it's a shame to lose the varied meanings to just a negative connotation. When we talk about lust, certainly it has very negative, very loaded connotation to it. Now let us look at love, lust, and longing from a different lens. My first question will be to Alka ji. Alka ji has just released a beautiful book called Body Sutra. Everything that you want to know about the sensuous, the sexual, the sacred in terms of ancient art and culture is in that book. Alka ji, tell me, but when you begin to decipher love, lust and longing, how things have changed from ancient times to the contemporary?
Gosh, that's a huge question. I'll just say that it's a cultural difference because cultures are changing and it's not what it was earlier. I think a lot of what you call pre-modern society is redrawn, and much of it is not a historical fact either, but something which has been interpreted through received wisdom and through the various texts for which there is no one author. I'll just go back to the Kama Sutra. I'm only going to take one text because that's the mother of all erotic literature, particularly in the Indian subcontinent. I'm not even going to move on to Anangaranga or the Koka Shastra or even the beautiful Sanskrit poetry of Kalidas, where if you're talking of love and desire, Meghadoot for me is one of the greatest works. But going back to the Kama Sutra, if you begin with the origin of it, and it is believed, largely believed, that it was the utterances of the lovemaking of Shiva and Parvati, which was heard by Nandi, and then it was kind of put into a collection of 7 books. Because many people, when you even ask me how it has changed from the past to the present, whenever you think of the word Kama Sutra, you only think of book 2, where people are standing on their heads and having sex with 4 or 5 women, where a man is this supra-human being who can satisfy 8 women at a time, women with their great, unsatiated appetites. Now, these are all things which are not really in the Kama Sutra. So, the Kama Sutra, when you are talking of ancient times, is a wonderful holistic text which talks of the balance of dharma, artha, Kama and moksha, and talks of the judicial balance.
Yes.
And it says that if you do not even experience Kam, which is actually physical love, and I'm not looking at the nuances of Shringar, Vilas and other things, because within the ancient readings of any text, there are multiple meanings for it, multiple alankars for it, and dhvanis for it. So from that, if we jump to present times, what do you look and see how the Kama Sutra is being interpreted? You take it from the the platform of all what you say, love, lust and desire, longing, which is very much part of human nature. And if you look at just the translation of the Kama Sutra, it is literally a pornographic text. In the Kama Sutra, the desire of the woman is as important as that of a man. And if you look at how it is interpreted today, it is the agency. If it is with a woman, then her connotations are different. Normally, it is a very patriarchal way,
Yes.
even today, of
Yes.
looking at the Kama Sutra.
Yes.
So I feel today, in spite of gender parities, in spite of people talking of same-sex love, for which I think Madhavi will be able to even say even better than me, in spite of all these, notions of parity, it is still very patriarchal when we look at love, lust, and desire. So this is the difference, what I see. That in the ancient past, it was really more democratic. The agency was both with men and women. And
yeah.
if you heard Devadatt's interpretation
Yes.
of Shiva and Parvati too,
Yes.
and I take them as the primordial parents, that itself becomes a different way of looking.
Yeah, so there's a sharp oblique from how it all started and now what it is, between the conventional and the contemporary. So your book, Sumana, How I Became a Tree. So while reading up on it, I was taken aback by the statement, or perhaps a confession, that you wanted to escape the emotional economy of life, and that's why you wanted to become a tree. So no brownies for understanding that it was deliberate as well as it was a cathartic. Because you say a tree gives without waiting for what we are giving it back. My question is it possible for a human to be completely bereft of love, longing, and desire?
The book is called How I Became a Tree.
Yeah.
I think the word become is very important to me. Become is related to the philosophy of becoming. And if you want to become anything, there has to be desire.
Yes.
So anything that you want to be, so even to be, even to have the desire to be bereft of desire is a kind of desire.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, and the emotional, what I wanted to escape from, this book came from a very personal space. It's a book of non-fiction. I was in a retrospectively, I can see that I was in a very difficult period in my life.
Yes, you mentioned that.
Yeah, and and the urge was to escape from that life, and I was exhausted of being a social human. So that was the life that I wanted to escape from. And so I thought, I want to live like something else. What is it that I could live as, that would allow me to escape the emotional economy of social life?
Yes.
And suddenly it seemed to have come to me like an epiphany that I wanted to become a tree. Many years passed, but this desire did not go. And I began to think of myself as abnormal in quotes, of course. And I began to then look for people who, like me, had exhibited this desire to live like a tree. So whether you think of Gautama sitting under a tree to escape from something, I found people like spiritual thinkers like Gautama, scientists like Jagadish Chandra Bose, who discovered that plants are living beings.
Yes.
While reading his research papers, I discovered that, like me, he and his wife were childless or child-free, whichever way you want to put it. And in his research papers, he refers to plants and saplings as bacha. This was a common observation that came to me from colleagues of that time, that what they thought of as abnormal affection for plant life, they tried to interpret it as me not having children, biological children of my own. So this journey was an emotional and intellectual quest for looking for people, not just, say, filmmakers or writers or artists, but ordinary people like myself who had exhibited the desire to become a tree. So this book is about such people and this desire.
And you also toyed with the idea of becoming a ceiling fan before that. When I was reading up on the book.
Yeah, so I think...
So why not the ceiling fan?
Because the ceiling fan does not have agency. Someone needs to switch it on and switch it off.
Yes, how wonderfully explained. Yes.
I think
So you did not want to give the remote in somebody else's hand.
No, and one of the central intellectual conceits, and I'm glad you mentioned emotional economy, it was this, that I had given so much emotionally, and I think all of us, or most of us, have been through this emotional turbulence in our lives where we feel we've given too much emotionally and not had that kind of reciprocity. What I was looking for was to be a being that could live outside this, cycle of reciprocity. Hence the choice of being a tree.
And yet have all the tactical senses in place.
Yes. But as you can see, I have clearly not succeeded in becoming a tree.
We are very happy to see you here and not as a tree. Otherwise, you wouldn't be participating in this wonderful, wonderful conversation with us. So, Madhavi, your book, Infinite Variety, A History of Desire in India, must have gone through a whole lot of research to write a book on a topic as dense, as loaded as that. You're the best author to speak about how perceptions have changed over the course of time from your point of view. I have already asked that question from Alka ji from her point of view. So are we falling prey to a repression of sexual desires now?
A one-word answer would be yes. And it's a weird phenomenon, because I think when we think about history or think about time, we think that we're sort of moving forward in terms of progress, that we are smarter in 2019 than perhaps people in 1919 were, and so on and so forth. And that is such a fallacy, especially in terms of desire and in terms of sexuality, that it's actually quite shocking to me that we can think of ourselves quite arrogantly as being so evolved and developed. And what's odd also is that the things we think about as freedoms right now, or as rights that we demand or rights that we possess, are actually shackles more than freedoms. And what is particularly sad, which is the only word I can use, what's particularly sad for people like us from the Indic subcontinent, and I'm not going to use the word India since it didn't exist until very recently, what's sad for us from the Indic subcontinent is that we have multiple alternatives that we can draw on. So if you think, for instance, of biblical societies, let's say in some parts of the West, where the alternatives are either so long dead or didn't exist at all. And so the biblical traditions against sexuality and desire are the only things they know. But we know better, or at least we should know better. And if we choose to ignore all those traditions, in which not only, as Alka quite rightly said, in the Kama Sutra is desire unabashedly praised, and not just, or not even primarily heterosexual desire, certainly not married desire. You have a lot of conversation about what they call people of the third nature. The idea of anal sex is a heterosexual idea, not like what we think of today. But if you just come to the long corpus, hundreds of years of Sufi poetry in India, of Bhakti poetry in India, the kinds of desire we are talking about, the kinds of intense, for instance, male-male desire that we are talking about, beats anything hollow that we have right now in terms of what we call gay rights or whatever it is.
How beautifully said. How beautifully said.
So there is a way in which, but it's also, that's what I'm saying is sad, that we have or should have access to these desires, but yet we're falling prey to a certain homophobia, a certain resistance to desire and to sexuality, because we are absolutely being sucked back into a vortex that is in fact not at all true of the Indic civilizations, right? And this remains one of the biggest ironies of our historical moment today, is that when people talk about Indian values, I mean, first of all, I think it's very strange to talk about Indian values, whatever they might be. But when people talk about Indian values and they pretend to be going back thousands of years, they're really only going back 200 years. And they're going back 250 years because what they are saying of, what they are describing as Indian values in terms of sexuality and desire are utterly Victorian British values. They have nothing to do nothing to do with the wide spectrum of desires that we have seen in this land for thousands of years. And we're talking about values, Victorian values, as I said, and people have said this often. When the Victorians came to India, they came from a land and a time where even the legs of pianos used to be covered because you're not supposed to look at legs or ankles.
Yeah.
That's the kind of,
And they became prudish.
that's the kind of sexuality we're occupying right now.
Yes, yes.
And if we didn't know any better, fine, but really, Indians, on every one of these fronts, we need to know better. We need to know differently because we have access to multiple traditions that we're just ignoring.
Yeah, so we have that hangover from the Victorian times, and those are the so-called Indian values, the ones we are following right now. So you just spoke about homosexual and heterosexual love here. So why is homosexual love, the same-sex love, will always be labeled as lust?
Is it?
Always.
Yeah?
Always. Because then there are those negative connotations that a society is looking at them with.
Yeah.
So why always lust?
I mean,
why can't that be a love and a desire?
I'm not sure that that's true. I don't like the word lust because
Yes,
it just
of
seems,
course.
it seems too judgmental to me and actually means nothing. It means you want to have sex. I mean, when you're in love with someone, don't you want to have sex with them? And it makes no sense to me. So I don't like the word lust. I think it's lazy and I think it's judgmental. The word I prefer, and as I was saying to you,
desire.
Mona, is the word desire. And for me, what is particularly potent about desire is that it is not an identitarian category. And you can see this in any of these texts that I've talked about, whether it's the Kama Sutra, whether it is the temple sculptures in Khajuraho, whether it is Mir Taqi Mir's poetry, whether it is Amir Khosrow writing for Nizamuddin Aulia, whatever it is, desire is non-identitarian. So Sufi poets continually write of themselves as if they were women, for instance. Bhakti poets male poets continually write of themselves as though they're women, because desire is something that takes you in its grip and actually loosens your hold on identity categories that you might have previously held sacrosanct. But this is a very political move, right? And so one of the things that I talk about in my book is that Awadh, which becomes the last bastion for the British, and the British, when they went to Awadh, were absolutely horrified because the Nawabs of Awadh would regularly, on the birth dates of the Peers, would dress as women and simulate what it meant to go through childbirth. Every month, they would tie red cloths around their waists and simulate what it meant going through menstruation. The British come into this and are absolutely horrified at what they saw as the unmasculine behavior of the Nawabs of Awadh. And Awadh then becomes, and lest we make the mistake of thinking that desire is not political. I mean, this is an example that tells you how deeply political desire is. They're horrified by Awadh. They take over Awadh politically in no large measure because they think it needs to be rescued sexually as well. And so they impose a regime of sort of puritanical behavior on Awadh because it's seen as the holdout of an India that we have now completely lost access to. A holdout of an India in which identity was not paramount, but desire was.
I just wanted to add one bit to Awadh and same-sex, because if you look at Wajid Ali Shah, he tied anklets, he did the dance, he wrote the most beautiful poetry, the most beautiful tumris, and in everyday parlance, even same-sex love, it was not really looked down upon. In everyday life, people would say, of course, there was a social hierarchy to it, and it was very much accepted that men did indulge in same-sex experiences, and they would just put it down and say Nawabi shauk hai, So it was very much culturally inclusive, like as it was in the Kama Sutra, where there was the Tritiya gender, the third gender. It was very much this thing, and you also see all manifestations of this in the temple sculptures, whether they are in Orissa, in Konark, or Khajuraho, same-sex, fellatio, all these kind of things are very openly shown. And it is not about that it is being looked down, it is just a part of the everyday.
And as we discussed yesterday, that in the temples of India, both the phallus and the yoni are also worshipped. So, what kind of India are we looking at now? So, Joshua, your book, The Heartfulness Way, goes by the principle of carpe diem. But the deep roots from the past form a blueprint of emotional patterns that we find hard to shrug off. When the past hurts are breathing down your neck, how can we seize the day?
Well, I wanted to just mention before I forget that I'm rather moved by Sumana's concept, or your sort of respect and reverence for our brothers and sisters in the plant kingdom. And I think that they have a lot to teach us. Nature in general has so much to teach us, not just the plant kingdom, but the animal kingdom as well. Right? And you know, The Heartfulness Way, which is the book which I co-authored. My co-author of this book, the book is conversations between us. It's conversational. Now, one conversation that we had, which is not in the book, is about this subject exactly, because he was speaking to me about what happens when you observe the coconut trees or the mango trees, or some of these animals like buffalo. How much do they demand? How much do they expect? Versus how much do they provide? Right? And the example is that a mango tree does not require mango juice. Right? It just requires water and sunlight. Right? A coconut tree, same thing. Muddy water. Not just water, but the best water is muddy water. Right? So the demands are very, very minute, but the output is enormous. So human beings, on the other hand, everything tends to be topsy-turvy with us, right? I feel like, you know, I had this thought this morning. I was in the airport in Delhi, and about to board the plane, and you have to pay attention, especially in some silent airports, you know, because I've missed planes because of silent airports.
Because you're
They
waiting
don't-
for an announcement.
That means you have to pay attention to what the other people are doing, right? If you see a crowd moving to your gate, that means you have to pay attention, and maybe they're doing something worthwhile, like boarding the plane, right? And I feel the same thing with nature. If you see every species of trees behaving a certain way, all of the animals, you know, the buffaloes don't require milk in order to produce milk, then we as human beings, we should look around us and see what are we missing here, because we're the absolute opposite, where we tend to demand more than we want to give. And you know, and in our own interpersonal relationships, this is the biggest source of stress between you know, anybody, right? That I will only give if I'm sure that there's going to be some sort of equality in giving. I don't want to give too much and then not receive as much. Right?
Right.
And then, of course, so this transactional nature of love, which then becomes not really love, because you're not openly giving anymore.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, my book isn't so much about human relationships. My book is about meditation. But still, let's talk about the ultimate relationship, which is the relationship with the source, you know, within yourself, right? And in that relationship also, I don't think that you can find, I don't think that it can be transactional in any way, right? Because if you look at the Gita, for example, and this famous concept of nishkam karma, right? Desireless action, people often get confused by this, and rightly so, because how many people would, you know, go to their office and slave away in the office without expecting a salary in return? On the material level, it's a nonsensical concept, because nobody follows it, nobody can conceive of following it. And this is backed up by the fact that this word, from what I've been made to understand, this word karma, in ancient times did not have the connotation of manual labor or mundane work. For that, I'm made to understand another word, shram, which was used, right? So this is not, what this message of the Gita, of desireless action, it has nothing to do with the material life in that sense. This is all about the spiritual life, desireless action. That means your relationship with the ultimate, your relationship with the source. If you're going and approaching the Lord or your deity, right, or your guru, with the idea that let me receive moksha, let me get liberated, let me have this, condition or that stage of, spiritual advancement, automatically the whole thing just goes for a toss, right? That's where desirelessness has to come into the picture, because otherwise it's like if, a son who's cultivating their relationship with their mother or their father, because they know that they stand to get an inheritance. Now the whole, what kind of relationship is that?
It's absolutely transactional.
Crude relationship. But if you may get the inheritance anyway, but the relationship should be based on love. So I think that's really what the essence of bhakti is. It's a selfless thing. It's like the coconut trees.
Yeah, we'll be coming to that question as well. So what Joshua says that, it's a conflict spectrum of everybody's lives. People are not against you. People are not for you either. They are for themselves, eventually. So Patanjali preaches, this is a common question to the panel, so everybody can take turns to answer. Patanjali preaches about karma and yoga coexisting in one form. Even Gandhiji practiced it. What are your views on it? Can they coexist? Karma and yoga, Alka ji?
Absolutely. For me, it's a way of life. Yoga is a way of life. Karma is a way of life.
Shankar was a Mahabhogi and a Mahayogi.
Absolutely, the erotic ascetic. So for me, there is no
difference.
No dichotomy at all.
Sumana?
I would just like to add to something that Joshua said, because we are talking about transactionality and emotional economies. One of the central reasons to do with reciprocity is greed, particularly emotionally. And it's so obvious and self-evident, and yet it came to me like an epiphany that plant life, particularly, any kind of plant life, trees, consume only that much water that they need and that much sunlight. They are not gluttons like us. They are not greedy. They just do with whatever they need. So this economy of need and want and desire is very specifically human.
Yes. When the needs are met, that is when wants begin.
Yeah, but the reason I didn't want to become an animal, because I've seen a cow overeat.
Chewing the cud.
Even I think a camel, we've never seen a thin camel. A camel has to overeat. But we don't know plants which have to overeat light, or we overwater a plant and kill its roots. The plant will take water as much as it needs. That also I find very important about, as a characteristic of plant life, particularly because we're talking about desire.
Yes. Same question to you.
So the
yoga and the karma?
About the coexistence of yoga and karma. It's a loaded question. And I know you didn't mean it to be that way, but it is a loaded question. And again, if I sort of come back to the moment that we are occupying now, where the idea of yoga suddenly seems to have become this national idea that we want to trademark, like we want to trademark basmati rice. It becomes the sort of quintessential Indian thing.
Patent.
But, which is fine, whatever. But for me, what is very, very dangerous about it is that it seems to be becoming quintessentially a Hindu thing. It seems to be trademarked and patented as a Hindu art, which is why, of course, when the government of India invited applications for yoga instructors around the world, hundreds and thousands of Muslim applicants were turned down because they picked only Hindus. So for me, what is dangerous about saying yoga is quintessentially Indian, or that it can be equated with karma, which of course it can be, is that once again we forget the history of yoga. Because yoga as we know it today is not Patanjali's yoga.
No.
Patanjali's yoga had hardly any asanas, hardly any poses. The yoga we know today is from a Persian source, compiled by visiting yogis around the country and actually setting out poses for us. The Persian text was not even translated for many hundreds of years. And then, of course, and then we get to Vivekananda, who tries to leach it of all its highly syncretic history. And that's the yoga we have now being practiced by the Prime Minister of this country and other people. So for me, what is dangerous about thinking about yoga as a transparent term is that it's not transparent at all. It actually speaks of a very important part of Indian civilizations, which is that it is a highly mixed, syncretic, complicated, wonderful set of traditions. And if we forget that and say this is part of Hindu India, again, to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, we have really lost a lot. If we think there is not a single thing in India today that is pure, yet the rush with which we move towards the idea of Swachhata, the idea of Swachh Bharat, you know, if Swachh Bharat was all about having clean roads and clean toilets, I'd be all for it. Right? I'm always worried about when the next clean toilet will be and how often we'll be able to go. But it seems to me that the idea of Swachh Bharat is about cleansing the narrative of India, so that we have only one narrative, that we assume there's only one India. And for me, that becomes the big danger, and yoga is an excellent example of that. It is not a single tradition, it is not a singular tradition, and it is by no means pure. As you and Alka were saying earlier as well, the coexistence of karma and yoga itself militates against the idea of purity or the idea of absolute segregation. And so yoga becomes one of those terms that I am deeply, deeply nervous has been co-opted by a political agenda that seems hell-bent on swachhata and is actually ignoring yoga in the process.
Joshua, your point of view on the same?
Kama and yoga?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can they coexist?
Well, I think, okay. So for me, yoga, I mean, I practice a yoga that's basically Patanjali yoga, right? And for me, as long as I'm using the term kama broadly now, I know it's specific to sexuality, but I'm talking about desire. So as long as there's desire, I think there's the need for yoga. So they have a coexistence in that light. Because in the ultimate state, if there's any ambition left over in me, if there's anything unfulfilled left over in me, then I haven't achieved it.
Yes.
Right? And so as long as there's some sort of restlessness, which I equate as desire, right? Then the goal has not yet been achieved. So then yoga remains, because yoga itself means that which unites, right? That which unites the individual with the universal. So until that happens, there's bound to be some level of desire, some level of restlessness. But once that does occur, then there's no more need for yoga, and there's also no more kama.
So Joshua, you also believe that heartfulness meditation can regulate the inner state in such a potent way that external circumstances don't control us anymore. So was it possible for Sumana and all of us to find inner peace without turning into a fan or a tree, as humans as we are, which we are very happy that she still is?
Well, I think that I don't think we're going to be able to actually escape being affected by the external world at some level or the other, especially at the level of consciousness, which is so delicate that anything can affect it. You know?
Anything can affect
so
us.
I think more what we're aiming at is a level of equanimity inside myself, where I myself am not affecting my inner state through my reactions to the external world. The external world, okay, it's there. There's nothing you can do about it. But see, I mean,
can you insulate yourself?
You
can you completely
insulate yourself,
isolate?
and
How
you would
It's
never
not
want
possible.
to. I don't think.
Yeah.
No, you would never want to
wouldn't want
insulate,
to,
right? But still, you can achieve this sthit pragya from one of the central ideas of the Gita again. This equanimity, this balance, because when you meditate and you go deep into some samadhi state, samadhi itself means balance. This word itself implies balance. So when you meditate and achieve samadhi, achieve balance, then you have some kind of sthit pragya state within yourself, and now you're not going to constantly react, because when I react to the world around me, or to my own thoughts and my own feelings, this reaction is always of like and dislike. There's always this classification of yes or no. I like you, I don't like you. Is it based on anything? I don't know if it's based on anything. I just see somebody's face and I think not this person. Right?
We tend to like people who are more like us.
Perhaps.
We have those biases.
Yes, but it's biases is the point. It's
these
not
are those
based in the
biases.
reality.
The horns effect and the halo effect.
So this constant reactivity is there inside, right? And I think that meditation does produce a state of this balance which causes that reactivity to go down. And when that reactivity goes down, then life changes entirely.
Because the responses take over. Well thought over responses take over when reactivity comes down.
It becomes a very natural response, a very heartfelt response, I would
Yes.
say. I mean, we can go into this, but there's not, I can say just very briefly. Can I just say something very briefly?
Yes, why
It's
not?
a little bit esoteric, that's why I'm hesitating. But there are these certain centers in the body, right? When you feel a reaction of like or dislike to anything, notice if you feel that in a certain place in your body, right? There's a point around here on the left side which tends to react in those situations on the left side. Now, depending on whether that is reactions and likes and dislikes tend to be either going to be of a material nature or it'll be of an emotional nature or a sensual nature. Depending on the category of that like or dislike, it'll travel and you'll experience that sensation in another place in the chest area. Now, when those vibrations become too heavy and so difficult to deal with, then it starts spilling over into other centers and creating a cascade of emotional effects within us. For instance, very briefly, here we have a center which produces peace. Here we have a center that is all about love. Here we have one which is all about courage. Here we have one which is about clarity and discrimination. But when these vibrations spill over, when you're just so reactive, and it just builds up and gets saturated, your system gets saturated, it spills over, and now the peace that you would normally experience as a result of this center here turns to its opposite. It turns to restlessness. Then that moves here, and love turns to hatred, or at least anger. And then that moves here, right? And that courage turns to fear, and that moves here. And this clarity turns to delusion. Now, this is exactly what Lord Krishna was talking about in the Gita, when he says that people dwelling on desires, it turns into anger. He broadly outlines it turns into anger and eventually turns into the ruin of reason. So he's actually outlining the process by which these vibrations move through these particular centers and create chaos and heaviness within us. And now we're lost. So we have to be able to clean up this situation and at the same time create balance within ourselves to insulate ourselves, or vaccinate ourselves rather, against having this reactive nature to begin with.
Thank you. Thank you. That was Sir Joshua explains the entire path that a confusion or anger or any kind of hatred or any kind of negative emotion and what can lead to in physical form. So a question common to the panel. Many people fall in love, and once you fall in love, there is a desire to be with that particular person, right? So if we call it lust, for now, for this particular question, right? So it is very apparent, it is very natural for a union with that person. But can lust take a reverse path and lead to love? Alka ji?
I think maybe we should begin the other way. Before
Josh,
I answer this
yes, why
question, can
not?
I just add something
Yes,
to what
why
Madhavi
not?
said?
Why not?
Madhavi has in her book, and I hope everyone reads it because it really, it's about self-knowledge. We've forgotten who we are as a culture, and her book kind of reminds us about this. She used the word syncretic culture. And I think most of us in the audience here and the panel would agree that we are not pure. We don't even believe in the idea of the pure. But this model that is being fed to us, one national language, one leader, one kind of, this kind of monoculture, and I've written about this recently. is I teach in a university in Sonipat, and I've just moved there. And these road dividers have only one kind of tree. That's the plumeria, which we also call the frangipani or frangipani, whichever way we pronounce it. Now, one of my favorite plant thinkers, or just a thinker, is Michael Pollan, where he critiques monoculture and says what monocultures like the ones promoted by Monsanto Corporation, for instance, have resulted in. We have always moved between species, and new species have been created from that space, just as new cultures have formed. So we talk about cosmopolitanism and take a lot of pride in it. I cannot think of a more cosmopolitan place than the forest. And we've forgotten that in this whole aspiration for one language, one leader, and everything else. I just wanted to add to what she said.
Yeah, that's a point of equality and diversity. So if you will not have diversity, what kind of equality are we talking about? I think they back each other as points, isn't it? So when we talk about love and longing, they are supposed to be very feminine attributes as the world sees them. They are these vices again. But when it comes to lust, it suddenly turns into a very masculine attribute. But if they were to reverse, they would be like, people would be judged. It would be almost prohibitory, isn't it? You feel so?
I think someone like me who derives her ethics from the natural world more than the social, I don't know any plant or animal which understands lust the way humans do.
Yes.
And so I don't believe in lust.
Yes. So when we talk about bhakti love, Alka ji, when we talk about bhakti love, what kind of love is bhakti love? It is also something which is transactional, because there is a longing to be one with that supreme. So how would you define bhakti love?
I think bhakti also has it's very nuanced. You can't, within our understanding, or what I call, again, I'd like to also use a similar word amongst Indic wisdom, there is no one trajectory. You can't just say, bhakti basically means is a kind of union with, what it is perceived as, from the Atma to the Paramatma, from the soul to the Brahman, physical to the Brahman. So I think even in bhakti, it depends on who the agent is of bhakti. Of course, most of bhakti bhav is through the feminine principle, whether it is in the Sufi tradition of Ishq Hakiki and Ishq Majazi, or whether it is in the typical Puranic tradition of the longing through the longing of the gopis with Krishna, the Maharas, or it is through the Sakhi Bhav, which it is even seen in Pushti Marg.
Yes.
Having said that, it can be, I think it depends. It can be Meera's bhakti, it can be Akka Mahadevi's bhakti, it can be bhakti of...
which is very subjective.
It's very subjective.
Akka Mahadevi or Jayadeva or Mirabai.
Yeah, and Jayadev's poetry can also be, I mean, when Barbara Stoller Miller kind of does it in a very beautiful way and gives the title of saying, when God is a customer. So it can be any kind of the trajectory of longing, of desire, of love can have different connotations for different people.
What about you?
Sorry, can I just add
yes,
to
of course.
both what Alka and Sumana said, which is that you're absolutely right that women's desire is seen socially as being a no-no, right?
Yeah,
it's prohibited, unacceptable, looked down upon, all that. Certainly, and we all know what it's like to live in that kind of social milieu. Women's desire has always been dangerous because it's always desire represented or expressed by a group of people that are meant to be hierarchically lower than men. And so, whatever women's desire, whether it is Mirabai's desire, for instance, for Krishna, the royal family of Mewar gets very
Yes,
upset about
yes.
it because it's a woman daring to express
Yes.
desire. This is also the reason why, for instance, around the world, male homosexuality is always lynched more than female homosexuality, because the idea is, how can men want to give up power over women in order to have sex with one another? So the idea always is that women have to be the underclass, and the underclass should never have desire. But of course, what's interesting, and this again is sort of a part of our historical trajectory. What's interesting, of course, and Alka mentioned that the Kama Sutra has 7 books. Of the 7 books, 2 books are devoted to the idea of the courtesan, to the idea of what it means for an independent woman earning her independence because of her desire.
Yes, yes.
What happens when the British come to India is that almost overnight, the courtesans who have had a long, rich cultural, educational traditions across Hindu and Muslim civilizations in this part of the world, overnight courtesans become prostitutes.
And have very rustic
And-
overtones to that.
And exactly, and become prostitutes and are criminalized and are charged with acting on their desires and getting money for it. Oh my God,
And
a
people
woman
started
getting
about-
money. So there is, again, to go back to this idea that sexuality is always political. So a woman's desire is feared because it can typically lead to financial independence. And what's for Vatsyayana, that financial independence is something to be celebrated. He keeps sort of saying, let me tell you how to get a little more money out of that guy, because, he's a jeweler and he has all those diamonds hidden under his closet and he hasn't told you about it. So let me tell you how to get that out of him. Now, financial independence for women, and I want to bring us back to 2019. How many women we know who will say after they get married that they're not working any longer? And we know statistically in India, the number of women in the workforce is going down. I mean, it is a shocking truth that we seem to have given in completely to this idea of sexual prudery, financial prudery, and we are allowing the narrative that you so rightly mentioned, the idea of women's desire being dangerous, we're allowing that to run rampant when, again, we should know better.
Yeah, and society started buttoning up during that time.
I just wanted to add just a little bit on the thing of the courtesan. In the Mauryan period, there was they also paid tax. They paid tax in the Mauryan period, and it was very much well established. And the courtesan, if you look at how it was interpreted, they had the freedom also to choose who
Yes,
they wanted
yes,
to
yes,
sleep with.
yes.
It's very different to a prostitute.
It was not hammered down on
No,
them.
they were not prostitutes. Very much, to some extent, if you can compare them, would be to the geisha tradition. But they were very, very skilled women. They knew the arts. They knew the 64 arts. Their places were hub of great
Well-educated,
political
intelligent.
intrigue, of people, of sharing of ideas. And there is an incident of Amrapali where the people of the city come to the father and say, you cannot get your daughter married. She is so beautiful, so cultured, so intelligent. She should be shared by the people of the city, and that's how she becomes the Nagar Vadu. And that is what there was the kind of hypocrisy and the kind of double standards, or even yeah.
No, that's another one.
That's from the other.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry. Okay. It
Amrapali,
broke.
yes.
No, it broke my thought
Yes,
because I was
Amrapali.
coming. No,
Yeah, the
Amrapali, I know,
Nagar
but I was wanting to give a. I was going to give another parallel example, which is just kind of gone. But
So I think we can throw the questions to the audience now. So the audience, if you'd like to ask the questions to any of our esteemed panelists, please do so. Hands going up. Yes, the girl in yellow. You.
Miss Maitri, so I want to, the question is open to all of you. Can you define love? Like, does it have a definite definition to follow through? Like, I have no idea what is love. So that's why I'm asking.
You know when you are in love, so it's an experiential question. But just as you didn't wake up in the morning thinking, I'm an Indian, I'm a girl, or oh, I'm from Pune, these identities don't matter to you. Similarly, I think the fact of you being a lover or being loved doesn't really occur to you. You feel this in a way if you become aware. I say this from my own experience of having, loved and been in love, or I would say loving. In love sounds somehow like an ailment. Uh, It's just not being aware of being a lover is my idea of being. I'm a lover of life, and I'm not aware of being a living thing at any given point of time. For me, that is love. A living thing is a loving thing.
Joshua? Madhavi? Yes, you wanted to say something? Sorry.
I think we can say maybe it's something that you become, not something that you do. It's something you are. You are. Everybody has this as their core. And when you are love, then you don't need to love anybody in particular. Because it's too much. How can you love everybody? So you just emanate this. You become identical to it. And in that case, everybody will just feel it oozing out of you. People will feel loved, but you're not doing anything, and I think this is this is my ideal of love, it's something that doesn't require effort, that you have to love somebody, or you have to receive love from somebody. It's just something that you are, and everybody benefits from it. Like the sun is just shining, it's not trying to shine you, okay, now I'll shine for you, it just shines,
Can I just be a little more pessimistic?
Yes.
I think love requires a lot of work. I don't think it's something that is easy at all. And I think the reason why it requires a lot of work, and Joshua, you'll forgive me, is because I don't think that's the fundamental thing of which we are made. In fact, this is what social scientists and political scientists have been saying for hundreds of years, that if you don't force human beings to behave nicely, they're going to behave badly, right? And in fact, the idea of human beings in what Hobbes calls the state of nature, and he says life is nasty, brutish, and short, because we're all going to be killing one another, which, you can look around you and say that's where we are right now. Love actually takes a lot of hard work. It's not the thing that comes automatically to us. And I think it is not coincidental that the phrase we use is that you fall in love. It's actually a coming down from the human, because to be human is actually not to be loving at all.
Can I just add one thing?
Here's another question.
Yeah, because I feel that it's a bit of a nuanced topic. Like, I feel that you're right, and I feel that what I'm saying also has merit. I feel that they're both simultaneously true, and the reason is because, like maybe the Vedantists or some people will say, you are, the godly nature exists within you. Your nature is divine. Or the Buddhists will say all have Buddha nature, right? But then you have that famous Mu koan, right? Where somebody comes and asks the Zen master, okay, so the dogma, the official line is that all have Buddha nature. So he says, does the dog have a Buddha nature? And he says, no. So he said, what? Right? So I think that there's this, everybody does have this, what you can call divine nature. But it's dormant in some respect. So actually it's not your nature. At this moment it becomes maybe some potential to be expressed. But you can say that you're correct in, it's not being expressed by 99%, maybe 100% of people. But I still don't think you can say that it's not present. But it's something to be developed.
In
evolved
these
into.
Hedonistic times, love is when your demands are being met by the other. The moment the demands cease to be met by the other, we feel that the other person does not love us. So basically, love is a war between subjective versus subjective, to me. Sorry, answering for my panelists. Yes, another question. Yes, please.
Nowadays, this homosexuality, gays and lesbian like this. So what is your opinion and why?
We start with the panelists.
Opinion of what?
Homosexuality.
Our opinion of homosexuality.
Yeah.
Which we talked about that already. It's
it's a problem nowadays.
It's a problem?
Nowadays it is happening a lot.
No?
It is, well, I think maybe your choice of words was not felicitous. As we said, as many of us have said already, desires have always existed in multiple forms. So this is not a new situation or a new occurrence. And if we think about any desire as a problem, then that is our problem, not the problem of the people who are feeling desire.
Anyone else wants to answer that question?
I wouldn't
Alka ji?
call it a problem. I would not want to call that a problem at all. It's very much part of human nature. And if you look at, physiologists, medical practitioners, it's a condition. Some people are heterosexual, some people are bisexuals, some people are homosexuals. So this is a condition with which a person is born, and that's how it is. And to say that it's becoming a problem or coming out, it's just that earlier, I think it was a very repressive society. Now I think, like everybody else, they too have their right to live life their way. So who is normal is who the agency is who's asking the question.
So when
I
we're
think it's
eating
a-
mangoes, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, you. Yeah, Sumana. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a problem only as much as love is a problem. I mean, we've all been in love and been faced with problems related to love. So in that case, it would.
Isn't it unnatural as such?
I think
No,
we have
it
to
isn't. Yeah.
move on. No.
Sir, the way we eat mangoes, we slice mangoes into 3 parts. 2 sides are the pulpy sides and 1 is a gutli. So the person who's eating the gutli is also enjoying his fair share of mango, and the person who's eating the slices is also enjoying. It is their take on it. Love has no language. Love doesn't know the other person. Love just knows love.
Visualize it is happening in your family and son is doing this. Then what will you say?
And
Yeah,
the last
so-
question.
Yeah, so actually I have written the question down. They say that the ultimate path to moksha or nirvana or the state of intellectual can be reached by avoiding the materialistic world, and that we call a grahas jivan. But as Shiva portrays, moksha or being liberated from your fear is outgrowing them rather than fighting it. Being a layman, all I have known is sadhus going in Himalayas and leaving everything behind for the sake of nirvana. But what I think, or what I have known about it, is that actual nirvana can be achieved by letting go the things you care by being there. For instance, you're leaving your family, so you are externally forcing yourself that you cannot meet them or cannot physically see them, which makes things simple. What if we stay with them and then keep us apart from everything? Isn't that the actual nirvana? Your thoughts. What is the actual nirvana? Is there any one way to achieve it, or we can avoid anything in our day-to-day life and I can achieve it? What is the actual state?
Can I just?
Come to my session at 6:40.
Thank you.